The message traveled across the stars at the speed of light. It was simple. It was desperate. It was a cry for help. They had never asked anyone for anything in 12,000 years. They were a peaceful species. They looked like large insects with gentle eyes and soft voices. They kept records. They wrote histories. They solved arguments between other species with patience and wisdom. Every race in the galaxy respected them. Every race trusted them. Now they were dying. Elder stood in the communication center of Prime. The old's four arms shook as he watched the sky through the cracked dome above. Black shapes moved across the stars like a disease spreading through healthy flesh. Millions of them. The devouring swarm had arrived. "Send it again," said to the young operator beside him. "Send it to everyone, every frequency, every channel, every species that can hear us." The operator's mandibles clicked with fear. "Elder, we have sent it 40 times. The Conquered has acknowledged our message. They say they are discussing options." Discussing. The word tasted like ash. While the Conquered discussed, the swarm had already taken the northern continent, had watched the feeds before they went dark. He had seen his people running. He had seen them caught. He had seen them consumed. The devouring swarm did not negotiate. They did not want territory or resources or slaves. They simply ate. They had destroyed 3 civilizations in the last 1,000 years. Entire species existed now only in history books, and now the swarm had come for the historians themselves. "The Conquered will not save us," said quietly. "They will calculate. They will measure our worth against their risk. They will find us wanting." He was not bitter, he understood. The galaxy was vast and cold, and survival meant making hard choices. They had never been warriors. They had no fleet. They had no weapons. They had only their books and their kindness, and neither could stop the darkness falling from the sky. A young burst through the door. She was bleeding from a wound on her side, and her wings hung broken behind her. "Elder, the Eastern Shield has fallen. They are in the capital." Closed his eyes. So this was how it ended. 12,000 years of history, of learning, of carefully preserved knowledge from 100 different species. All of it would be lost. All of it would be consumed. "Keep sending the message," he told the operator. "Until the very end, someone might hear, someone might remember us." He did not believe it, but hope was all he had left. Far across the galaxy, the message reached the Galactic Concord's headquarters. Representatives from 40 species sat in the great circular chamber, arguing. "We must act," the ambassador said. Her blue skin flushed purple with emotion. "They are our friends. They have helped every species in this room at some point." "And we are grateful," replied High Speaker N, his massive scaled body shifting uncomfortably. "But the swarm has 3 million bioships. Our combined fleet is less than half that. We would be throwing lives away. So we do nothing. We do what is wise. We protect the core worlds. We build our defenses. We let the swarm feed, and perhaps they will be satisfied." The ambassador stared at him. "They are never satisfied, you know this." "Then we buy time, time to prepare, time to grow stronger." N's voice was heavy with regret, but his decision was made. "I am sorry for the truly, but I will not sacrifice 100 worlds to save one." The chamber fell silent. No one argued. No one could. The math was simple and terrible. They would die and the galaxy would watch, and everyone would pretend they'd had no choice. Then a small voice spoke from the back of the chamber. "Excuse me." Every head turned. The human ambassador stood at her podium. She was small compared to most species in the room, soft-skinned, fragile-looking. Humans had only joined the Conquered 40 years ago, and most species still didn't know what to make of them. They came from a harsh world. They had strange customs. They formed attachments too easily and fought too readily. They had one vote in the Conquered, one vote among 40. They didn't matter. "Yes, Ambassador," and asked with barely hidden impatience. "We have received the distress signal," Ambassador said. I just wanted to inform the conquered that humanity will be responding. Silence. Responding, and leaned forward. Ambassador, you have perhaps 200 warships. The swarm has millions. What exactly do you think you can accomplish? Ambassador smiled. It was a strange expression. The translator systems couldn't quite capture its meaning. We're not sending 200 ships, High Speaker. Then how many? All of them. She turned and walked out of the chamber before anyone could respond. 6 hours later, the first human ships began jumping into the system. The conquered observers who witnessed it would later describe the experience as watching a dam break. Ships poured out of hyperspace in an endless stream. Military vessels arrived first. Then came the others. Mining ships with welded armor plating. Cargo freighters with missiles strapped to their hulls. Colony transports carrying volunteers who had dropped everything at the first word of the distress call. Private yachts owned by wealthy humans who had simply pointed their ships toward Prime and pushed their engines to maximum. United Earth Command had not ordered civilians to come. They had not needed to. The message had spread across human space like fire through dry grass. Someone was in trouble. Someone needed help. That was all humans needed to know. On Prime, Elder watched his display screen with disbelief. The conquered fleet count beside the human designation kept climbing. 200, 500, 1,000, 2,000. It did not stop. Who are these people? The young operator whispered. Had studied humans. He had read their histories, their myths, their stories. He had seen the violence in their past and wondered how they had survived long enough to reach the stars. Now, watching their ships fill the sky like an answer to a prayer, he finally understood. They are the ones who come when you call, he said softly. They are the ones who never learned to look away. Above Prime, the devouring swarm turned its attention toward the gathering fleet. 3 million bioships against a few thousand human vessels. The math was simple. But the swarm had never fought humans before. They were about to learn that humans did not care about math. Ambassador had served the galactic conquered for 300 years. He had seen empires rise and fall. He had witnessed wars that burned across entire star systems. He had thought he understood the galaxy and all its species. He did not understand humans. The conquered had sent him to observe the situation at Prime. It was meant to be a simple assignment. Watch the humans fail, document their destruction, report back to the council so they could use the tragedy as a lesson about acting without thinking. Instead, found himself standing on the observation deck of a conquered monitoring station, watching human ships pour into the system like water from a broken pipe. His 4 eyes could not process what he was seeing. His translator could not find words for what he was feeling. "This is madness," he whispered to his assistant. "Complete and total madness." His assistant, a young named, stood beside him with her mouth hanging open. "Ambassador, my scanners are showing over 4,000 human vessels now, and more are arriving every minute." "I can see that." "But sir, human space only has about 3,000 registered military ships." "I know. So where are the rest coming from?" Pointed at the display screen. A large vessel had just jumped into the system. It was ugly. It was covered in patches and welded plates. It had no weapons that he could see. "That is a mining ship," he said. "It is designed to drill into asteroids. According to my database, it belongs to a company that extracts rare metals from the outer planets of the Sol system." "What is it doing here?" "I have no idea." Another ship appeared, then another, watched as his computer tried to identify them. A luxury cruise liner, a university research vessel, a transport ship that normally carried food between human colonies. None of them were military. None of them should have been anywhere near a war zone. Yet here they were. "Get me a communication channel to the human fleet commander," said. "I need to understand what is happening." It took 20 minutes to establish contact. When the screen finally flickered to life, found himself looking at a human female with gray hair and tired eyes. She wore a military uniform covered in medals and insignia that meant nothing to him. "Ambassador," she said, her voice was calm and flat. "I am Admiral Sarah, how can I help you?" "Admiral, I am here on behalf of the Galactic Concord to observe the situation. I must admit, I am confused by what I am seeing." "What confuses you?" Gestured at the display behind him. "You have brought thousands of civilian vessels into a combat zone, mining ships, transports, even pleasure craft. These ships have no weapons, they have no armor. They will be destroyed in seconds if the swarm attacks them." Admiral nodded slowly. "Yes, they know that." "Then why are they here?" The Admiral was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "Because we asked for volunteers and they came. Because they are dying and these people could not sit at home and do nothing. Because humans do not know how to watch others suffer and look away." "But they will die." "Probably some of them." Eyes hardened. "But they will die helping. They will die making a difference. And to a human, that matters more than living safely while others scream for help." Did not know how to respond. In his 300 years, he had never encountered a species that thought this way. The galaxy was built on calculation, on self-interest, on survival at any cost. Humans seem to have missed that lesson. "Admiral," he said finally, "the swarm has 3 million ships. You have perhaps 10,000 now, and most of those cannot fight. What is your plan?" Smiled. It was not a happy expression. "We're going to make them regret coming here." "That is not a plan." "It's the only one we need." The communication ended. Stood in silence, trying to process what he had heard. Ambassador asked nervously, "What do we do?" "We watch," said. "We record. And we pray to whatever gods we believe in that these insane creatures know something we do not." On the bridge of the human flagship Unconquered, Admiral turned to her tactical officer. "Status report." "We have 12,847 vessels in system, ma'am. About 3,200 are military. The rest are civilian volunteers. We've got mining ships, cargo haulers, passenger liners, and about 200 private yachts." "Weapon status." "The military ships are fully armed. The civilians have improvised. The mining ships have converted their drilling lasers into weapons. The cargo haulers have strapped missiles to their hulls. One cruise liner somehow found a bunch of old artillery cannons and bolted them to their observation deck." Almost laughed, almost, "and the enemy?" "The swarm is holding position around Prime. 3 million bioships, give or take. They seem to be waiting." "Waiting for what?" "Unknown, ma'am. Maybe they're trying to figure out what we're doing." Looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, millions of alien creatures were staring at her fleet, trying to understand why these strange mammals had come to die for strangers. Let them wonder, she thought, let them fear. "Signal all ships," she said. "We move in 6 hours. Anyone who wants to leave can leave now. No judgment, no shame." She waited. The minutes passed. Not a single ship left. "Well then," said quietly, "I guess we're all crazy together." On Prime, Elder watched the human fleet organize itself into formation. He did not understand their tactics. He did not understand their strategy. But he understood something more important. They had come. Across the void of space, across the vast emptiness between stars, these strange creatures had heard his people screaming, and they had come. Not for money, not for power, not for any reason that made sense. They had come because someone needed help. Was old. He had seen many things in his long life. He had watched species rise and fall. He had recorded the deaths of civilizations and the births of new ones. But he had never seen anything like this. "Elder," the young operator said, "the human admiral is requesting to speak with you." Straightened his old body. Put her through. Admiral's face appeared on the screen. She looked at him with eyes that held no fear, only determination. Elders, she said, we're here. Tell your people to hold on. Help is coming. Admiral replied, his voice cracking with emotion. Why did you come? Your conquered abandoned us. You owe us nothing. Was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that would remember for the rest of his life. You called for help. That's all the reason we've ever needed. The line went dead. And above Prime, the human fleet began to move. The swarm watched them come, 3 million ships against 12,000. The math was simple. The outcome was certain. But as the first human weapons began to fire, the swarm felt something it had never felt before. Uncertainty. These creatures were not running. They were not surrendering. They were not begging for mercy. They were attacking. And they were smiling. The first day of the battle was chaos. Human ships crashed against the swarm like waves against rocks. Explosions lit up the darkness of space. Ships died by the hundreds. The swarm pushed forward with overwhelming numbers, and for every bioship destroyed, 10 more took its place. Ambassador watched from the observation station with growing horror. This was exactly what the conquered had predicted. The humans were being slaughtered. Their bravery meant nothing against such numbers. They should retreat, whispered beside him. They've lost almost 1,000 ships already. Any sane commander would pull back and regroup. Said nothing, he just watched. The human fleet did not retreat. Instead, something strange happened. As ships fell, others moved to fill the gaps. Damaged vessels kept firing until they could fire no more. Pilots whose ships were destroyed ejected into space and were picked up by passing vessels, only to climb into new fighters and return to the battle. One human destroyer took a direct hit that killed half its crew. The survivors sealed the damaged sections, rerouted power, and kept fighting. When their main guns failed, they turned their ship directly toward a swarm carrier and crashed into it at full speed. The crew ejected at the last second, floating in space until a cargo ship swept by and collected them. 20 minutes later, those same crew members were manning guns on the cargo ship, shooting at the enemy that had just destroyed their home. This is impossible, muttered. They should be braking, they should be running. Why aren't they? Asked. Had no answer. The Swarm Queen watched the battle through a million eyes. She had consumed 3 civilizations. She had destroyed fleets many times larger than this one. She knew how prey behaved when they were losing. They panicked, they fled, they surrendered and begged for mercy that would never come. These creatures did none of those things. The Queen pushed more ships into the battle. She sent her fastest hunters after the weakest human vessels. She targeted their command ships and their supply lines. Every tactic that had worked before, she used again. Nothing worked. When she killed a human ship, the others did not flee. They fought harder. When she wounded their vessels, they did not limp away to safety. They charged forward with even greater fury. When she cut off their communications, they kept fighting without orders, each ship knowing exactly what to do. It was as if every human shared a single mind, a single purpose. But they didn't. The Queen could sense that. Each human was an individual, separate and alone. Yet somehow they fought as one. On the ground, things were even stranger. Human soldiers had landed on Prime to help defend the remaining cities. They fought beside the few warriors who had taken up weapons for the first time in generations. They fought in the ruins of ancient libraries and the rubble of beautiful temples. And they did not stop. The swarm's ground forces were designed to overwhelm through numbers. They would attack in waves, wearing down defenders until exhaustion made them easy prey. This had always worked before. Every species eventually tired. Every species eventually broke. Humans did not break. A group of human soldiers held a single bridge for 72 hours without sleep. They took stimulants to stay awake. They took turns resting for 5 minutes at a time while their companions covered them. When their ammunition ran low, they fixed bayonets to their rifles and fought the swarm in hand-to-hand combat. Bayonets had to look up the word. They were long knives attached to guns. Humans had invented them centuries ago in their primitive past. They had never stopped making them. They had carried them to the stars. The conquered observer on the ground sent back a single message. The humans brought knives to a war against a species that has destroyed civilizations, and they are winning. Elsewhere, a human medic ran into the middle of a firefight to drag a wounded to safety. She was shot twice on her way back. She kept moving. She delivered the wounded alien to a field hospital, received basic treatment for her own wounds, and returned to the battle 20 minutes later. When asked why she had risked her life for a stranger from another species, she seemed confused by the question. "She was hurt," the medic said. "I could help. What else was I supposed to do?" The second day was worse for the swarm. Human reinforcements kept arriving. Every time the Queen thought she understood their numbers, more ships appeared. They came from every corner of human space. Some had traveled for days at maximum speed, pushing their engines beyond safe limits just to arrive a few hours sooner. One ship arrived with its hull glowing red from the heat of its overtaxed engines. The crew had known they might not survive the journey. They had come anyway. The Queen began to feel something unfamiliar. It took her a long time to identify the emotion. Fear. Not fear of losing. She still had overwhelming numbers. She could still win this battle if she was willing to pay the price. But fear of what she was facing. Fear of creatures who did not behave like prey should behave. Fear of a species that seemed to have no concept of acceptable losses, no understanding of when to quit. On the third day, the Queen watched a single human fighter pilot fly directly into the heart of one of her carrier beasts. The pilot's ship was damaged. His weapons were offline. He had nothing left except his engines and his will. He crashed his ship into the carrier's brain cluster, killing himself instantly, but destroying a vessel that held 1,000,000 of her children. The Queen searched her memories. In 100,000 years of consumption, she had never seen prey sacrifice itself willingly. Prey ran, prey hid, prey begged. Prey did not smile as they died. Yet the human pilot had been smiling. She had seen it through her warrior's eyes in the moment before impact. He had been smiling. "What are you?" she whispered into the void. There was no answer. Only more human ships, more human soldiers, more human voices shouting defiance into the darkness. By the end of the third day, the swarm had lost nearly 500,000 ships. The humans had lost 3,000. The math still favored the Queen by an enormous margin. But the math did not capture what was really happening. Her children were starting to hesitate. For the first time in their existence, they were facing something they did not understand. Prey that attacked, prey that did not fear death, prey that seemed to grow stronger the more you hurt them. The Queen made a decision. She would pull back her forces and regroup. She would study these creatures. She would find their weakness. But as she began to issue the order, she saw something that stopped her cold. More human ships were arriving. Not military ships this time. These were different, slower, softer, completely unarmed. And there were thousands of them. The Queen watched them come with growing dread. What new madness was this? What kind of species sent helpless vessels into a war zone? She was about to find out. And she would never be the same. The ships came slowly. They were not built for war. They were not built for speed. They were built to carry families across the stars in comfort and safety. Generation ships, luxury cruise liners, university research vessels, private yachts, hospital ships with red crosses painted on their hulls, even a few ancient colony transports that should have been in museums. They came by the thousands, streaming into the system like a river of light. Admiral stood on the bridge of the Unconquered and watched them arrive. Her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. All civilian vessels, this is Admiral. I must warn you that this is an active combat zone. The enemy has millions of ships. I cannot guarantee your safety. I cannot even guarantee your survival. If you wish to leave, no one will judge you. The response came from 1,000 different voices, a chorus of ordinary people who had crossed the stars to stand beside strangers. We're not leaving. We came to help. Just tell us where you need us. Closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, her voice was thick with emotion. Welcome to the fight, everyone. Let's show them what humanity really is. The civilian ships spread out across the system. Hospital ships moved to the rear, setting up medical stations for the wounded. Cargo vessels distributed food, water, and ammunition to exhausted military crews. Engineering ships began repairs on damaged warships, working under fire to keep the fleet fighting. And then there were the others, the ones who had no useful skills, the ones who had come simply because they could not stay away. A retired teacher from Mars set up a communication station on her yacht, coordinating messages between ships that had lost their comm systems. A family of farmers from a distant colony world converted their cargo hold into a refugee shelter, taking in civilians who had been evacuated from the planet below. A group of university students used their research vessel to analyze the swarm's movements, feeding tactical data to military commanders. Everyone found a way to help. Everyone found a place in the fight. Ambassador watched it all with growing disbelief. He had studied humans for decades. He had read their histories and analyzed their behavior. He had thought he understood them. He understood nothing. Why? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Why would civilians come to a war? Why would teachers and farmers and children risk their lives for a species they have never met? Shook her head. I don't know, Ambassador. I don't think anyone knows except the humans themselves. Decided to find out. He requested permission to visit one of the civilian ships and was granted access to a large cargo vessel called the Hope's Light. It was a food transport, normally used to carry supplies between human colonies. Now it was serving as a combination refugee shelter, supply depot, and repair station. The human who greeted him was old. Her hair was white, her face was wrinkled, and her hands shook slightly as she offered him a cup of something warm to drink. Ambassador, she said with a smile, welcome to our humble ship. I'm no relation to the Admiral despite the name. Mrs. said carefully, may I ask you a question? Of course. Why are you here? Looked at him with gentle eyes. Where else would I be? Safe at home, away from a war that does not concern you. Doesn't concern me, laughed softly. Ambassador, there are people dying out there. There are children crying for their parents. There are wounded who need care and hungry who need food. How could that not concern me? But they are not your people. They are not even your species. Was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached out and took his hand in hers. Her grip was surprisingly warm. Let me tell you something about humans, she said. We are not a perfect species. We have done terrible things to each other throughout our history. We have fought wars and committed crimes and hurt each other in ways I cannot describe. I know your history, said. It is violent. Yes, but there is something else in us, something that balances the darkness. Eyes grew distant. When disaster strikes, humans come together. When strangers cry out for help, we answer. It doesn't matter who they are or where they come from. If someone is suffering and we can help, we help. It's not logical, it's not strategic, it's just who we are. But you might die here. I might, smiled. But I would rather die helping than live knowing I did nothing, wouldn't you? Had no answer. On the planet below, refugees were being loaded onto human transports. The evacuation had been going on for 2 days, and thousands of aliens had been saved from the swarm's advance. One young, barely more than a child, clung to the leg of a human soldier as she boarded a transport ship. She was crying, terrified of leaving her home, terrified of the monsters that had come to destroy her world. The soldier knelt down beside her. He was huge by standards, covered in armor and weapons, his face from battle. He looked like a nightmare made flesh. But his voice was gentle. "Hey there, little one," he said softly. "It's okay. You're safe now. We're going to take you somewhere the bad things can't reach you." "I want my mother," the child wept. The soldier's face tightened with pain. I know you do, and we're looking for her, I promise. But right now I need you to be brave for me. Can you do that?" The child nodded slowly. "Good girl." The soldier picked her up and carried her onto the transport. "I've got you. Nothing's going to hurt you while I'm here." Ambassador saw this. He recorded it, and he finally began to understand. The Swarm Queen watched the civilian ships with something approaching horror. She had faced military fleets before. She understood warriors. They fought because they were ordered to, because it was their purpose. But these were not warriors. These were ordinary creatures, soft, weak, completely defenseless. And they had come anyway. The Queen searched her ancient memories for something similar. She found nothing. In a million years of existence, she had never seen prey choose to face her when they could have fled to safety. More importantly, she had never seen what happened next. The human military ships, exhausted from 3 days of fighting, saw the civilian fleet arrive. And something changed in them. They fought harder. They moved faster. They took risks they had avoided before. The Queen realized what was happening with dawning dread. The humans were not just protecting the anymore. They were protecting their own people, their families, their friends, the civilians who had come to stand beside them. And humans, she was learning, would do anything to protect those they loved. The Queen made her decision. For the first time in her species' million-year history, she gave an order that had never been given before. "All forces," she commanded, "retreat." Her children hesitated, confused. They did not understand. They had never retreated. They had never needed to. "Retreat," the Queen repeated, "now before it's too late." The swarm began to pull back. And across the battlefield, human voices rose in a ragged cheer. They had won. They had actually won. The swarm retreated beyond the galactic rim. 3 million bioships fled from a force less than 100th their size. They left behind the bodies of their dead, the wreckage of their carriers, and something they had never left behind before. Failure. The Swarm Queen spent many cycles trying to understand what had happened. She analyzed every moment of the battle, every human tactic, every impossible act of courage she had witnessed. She searched for weakness, for exploitable flaws, for anything that would let her return and finish what she had started. She found nothing. In the end, she issued a single directive to her countless children. It spread through the hive mind like a disease, infecting every swarm creature in existence with a new emotion. Fear. "Do not wake the humans," the Queen commanded. "Do not touch their worlds. Do not harm their allies. If you encounter them, flee. If they pursue you, surrender. They are not prey. They are something else. Something we do not understand. Something we cannot defeat." For the first time in a million years, the devouring swarm learned to be afraid. On Prime, the survivors emerged from their hiding places and looked up at a sky that was no longer filled with death. Human ships still orbited above, keeping watch, making sure the swarm was truly gone. Elder stood in the ruins of his capital city and wept. Not from sadness, from gratitude. Humans moved through the rubble, clearing debris, treating the wounded, distributing food and water to the survivors. They worked beside volunteers, sharing jokes that didn't translate but somehow still made everyone laugh. They played with children, teaching them strange human games that involved throwing balls and chasing each other. They had come to save strangers. Now they stayed to rebuild what had been broken. The Galactic Concord held an emergency session 1 week after the battle ended. The chamber was silent as Ambassador presented his report. He showed recordings of the battle, of the civilian fleet, of old women serving food to soldiers and children playing in the rubble of destroyed cities. When he finished, no one spoke for a long time. Finally, High Speaker rose from his seat. The massive scaled alien looked older than he had before, as if the weight of what he had witnessed had aged him beyond his years. "I was wrong," he said simply. "I calculated losses and gains. I measured strategic value. I did what I thought was wise." He paused. "I was a coward." The chamber remained silent. "The humans did what I was afraid to do. They risked everything to save strangers. They brought their families to a war zone because they could not bear to wait at home while others suffered." N's voice cracked. "I do not understand them. I do not know if I ever will, but I know this: they have shamed us all." The Concord voted unanimously to offer humanity a seat on the High Council. It was the fastest vote in their history. Admiral received the news aboard the Unconquered. She read the message twice, then called for a meeting with her senior officers. "The Concord wants us on the High Council," she told them. "They're offering us power, influence, a voice in how the galaxy is run." "That's good news, isn't it?" her tactical officer asked. Shook her head slowly. "I'm going to decline." Why?" Looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, families were returning to their homes. Children were sleeping safely for the first time in weeks. Lives were being rebuilt from the ashes of destruction. "We didn't come here for power," she said. "We came because someone was screaming into the dark, hopping anyone would hear. That's not politics. That's not strategy. That's just being human." She turned to face her officers. "The day we start expecting rewards for helping people is the day we stop being who we are. I won't let that happen." She sent her response to the Concord. It was short and simple. "Thank you for the honor. We must decline. We did not save them for a seat at your table. We saved them because they needed saving. That has always been enough for us. We hope it always will be." The galaxy was confused. They had never seen a species turn down power before. They did not understand why anyone would. But they were beginning to learn. 1 year later, the completed construction of a monument in the center of their rebuilt capital. It stood 50 meters tall, carved from white stone that had been from their sacred mountains. The statue showed a human hand reaching down to lift a fallen figure. The human was not depicted as a warrior or a hero. They were shown as something simpler, a friend, helping someone who had fallen. The inscription at the base was written in every known language. It read, "They came not for glory or gain, but because we called. May we learn to be worthy of such friendship." Representatives from every conquered species attended the dedication ceremony. They stood in silence as elders spoke about what humans had done, what they had sacrificed, and what the galaxy had learned from them. "We thought we understood strength," said. "We measured it in ships and weapons and strategic advantage. The humans taught us we were wrong. True strength is not the power to destroy. It is the courage to protect, the willingness to sacrifice for strangers, the refusal to look away when others suffer." He turned to look at the monument, tears streaming down his ancient face. "The humans did not save us because we were valuable. They saved us because we were people, because we were afraid, because we called out into the darkness and they heard us." He paused. "I hope we never forget that lesson. I hope we learn to be like them." Across the galaxy, things began to change. Species that had dismissed humans as violent primitives started to see them differently. They watched how humans treated their enemies and their friends. They saw humans adopt alien orphans and defend alien worlds and risk their lives for creatures they had never met. They saw something they had never seen before, a species that formed bonds with everyone it encountered, a species that could not watch others suffer without trying to help, A species that was dangerous not because of its weapons, but because of its heart. The swarm had learned to fear humans. The galaxy was learning something different. They were learning to love them. And in the end, that changed everything. The human fleet eventually left Prime. The soldiers went home to their families. The civilians returned to their ordinary lives. The mining ships went back to mining. The cargo vessels went back to carrying food. But something had changed. The galaxy would never be the same. Because now everyone knew the truth that the swarm had learned at such terrible cost. Humans were not frightening because they were willing to die. They were frightening